So, Jai Bhim, friends,
Yes.
I am grateful to Ambedkar King Study Circle for organizing this lecture series. And I'm grateful to my scholar friend, Professor Murli Natarajan and Karthik for inviting me to share my research. I see Professor Meena Danda is also here. So, hello, Meena. It's an honor to present with an eminent cultural psychologist and an incredible human being, Professor Ramalingam. Thank you for such an engaging talk. Various overarching themes of dignity that Ram has raised. In my talk, you would see the implication of some of these ideas in the form of student activism in the universities. The broader term that we generally use of social justice in terms of caste, it's actually a struggle for dignity that Ram rightly pointed out. And he said that when dignity is violated, self-worth is challenged, when that identity is stigmatized, well-being is threatened, it leads to a different chaos, stress, and as a result, to tell you this data, that between 2014 to 16, in 3 years, 26,500 students lost their lives by committing suicide, and Rohit was one of them. So the solution is to cultivate, as Professor Ram said, that solution is to cultivate a commitment and building trust and solidarity, and that's what activists are doing. And my talk is basically part of my paper that I have have written for a journal called Critical Times by Duke University Press, which is forthcoming in the next issue in next month. While I was preparing for this talk today, I also opened my notes. It was exactly 10 years ago in 2010 when I interviewed an Ambedkarite in JNU for my MPhil research on JNU student politics. That was my first interview as a researcher. In the past 10 years, I have met more than 1,000 Ambedkarites from different parts of the world, including India, UK, Malaysia, and USA. In the past 10 years, I observed a tremendous growth of Ambedkarites and Ambedkarism through their global activism. One thing that I find very common among the majority of the activists is that they all are college or university educated youth, or have been educated. I focused my attention on the university space to understand the power of this space. So now the university space, the most endangered zone in Indian democracy, is in the present, is witnessing the ideological churnings, contradictions among various radical voices contesting culturally hegemonic practices. Student activism in general and anti-caste activism in particular offers a complex interplay of caste, gender, culture, and politics in the university space, traditionally defined as neutral space. My argument is that anti-caste activism on campuses invoke the democratic space of universities, where ideological meanings are constructed and deconstructed to unveil the suppression of historically marginalized voices in contemporary network society. And actually, it goes in a way a little bit of different when you see many of the liberal or Marxist scholars, they argue, they look at the university space as a space of inequality, because the idea of merit itself is kind of creates different hierarchy. But when you look from a Dalit point of view, that is the only space actually Dalit have where they actually claim their dignity, where they struggle for the rights, where there is a kind of democratic space that they can create. So the dominant culture and politics are actually rooted in the iron law of ancient hierarchy. Hierarchy is intrinsically opposed to the self-historicizing and well-informed democratic aspiration of student activism. And that's the training that students get from the university space. So before I talk about activism, I want to establish this fact that I believe that our activists, no matter what ideology they belong to, They all are the products of their lived experiences. Their lived experience reflect in their activism. To give you one example from my research in Indian university campuses, until 2006-7, there is almost no evidence of, and this is more of the North Indian campuses, there is no evidence of any major protest by OBCs in the university campuses, despite their presence in the university system. But until then, there was of course no reservation policy for them in these public centralized university public funding. In 2006, when Arjun Singh Committee recommendation known as Mandal 2 were implemented, with the implementation of the 26% of reservation in higher education, a significant number of OBCs entered in the central university system. And this was the first time for them, for OBCs, to face that label, Kotawala or Sarkari Dhamal, or from my field work that I got, all these derogatory, as Ram has rightly pointed out, that when your first time, when your identity is challenged. So a word which was used in JNU, which I heard, it's called the Singh Arjun ki Nazayaz Aulad, and they call it Sana. That's the code word they do, or Mandal ki Pedaish, and that the code word was MP, among the upper caste. Or there is another word they use called Chaturs, when OBC started entering. Chatur is like the fourth in the Chaturvarnas. So, etc. These are many, the way actually the identity is stigmatized. Most of the activists in JNU or Hyderabad Central University or Delhi University, IITs or IIMs, also in this Mumbai and many other institutions, OBC's student has to face the stigma of being from reserved categories. And some of you must be remembering that a nationwide anti-reservation wave that was started by the Youth for Equality, known as YFE, as my research shows, that had not been there YFE, Dalit movement would have never understood the politics of those who were working in the Marxist movement, but were sympathizer to anti-reservation wave. I wrote a few analysis papers discussing the election data from 2007-8 and questioned that made me think also this question that researching student politics was very very interesting and intriguing. As a common sense of that time, that JNU was a red campus, Marxist campus. That means JNU has always been in the hands of radical Marxist student unions. That year, particularly in 2007, when YFE, Youth for Equality, fought election, it was very surprising that the vote bank of Congress, the student NSUL, and right-wing APPP was intact. But YFE, which is a newly born organization in JNU, gained almost 1,000 votes and just missed the victory nearly by 50 votes. And the radical left student association, ISA, won the election. But the question remained that how come a newly formed organization gained nearly 1,000 votes in a traditional left campus? Well, who voted for YFE? And I leave this question here and for now, and want to tell you something more about what else has been going on in student politics. As a scholar of social movements, I was reading a Swedish scholar who studied Dalit movements in India. Her name is Eva Maria Hartman. She says in her research that for some people, activism may be a matter of survival, while for others, it is an activity on the side regarding some minor issues in their lives. And I was wondering, what does it mean by survival for an activist? When an activist joins a group, he or she becomes part of common framework within which they work and understand each other. The tacit knowledge which they come to share over time makes them part of one and the same cultural discourse, and they often understand each other's action without words. She finds Hartman finds it analytically fruitful to differentiate between the Indian public sphere and then Dalit counterpublic. And I think some of this work Murli has also done in that context. So now, coming to what is happening on the campuses regarding this caste class confluence. So caste has always been an issue of debate between Dalits and Marxists in India. But the anti-national debate and post-Rohit Vemula agitation in 2016 sparked a wide-ranging debate on caste. Both the Rohit and the Azadi movement in JNU have brought together discourses of class and caste discrimination. This marked a unity among the oppressed groups in Indian society, giving them a new voice. The emergence of Birsa Ambedkar Phule Association, BAPSA, at Jawaharlal Nehru University and also later in Central University of Gujarat, where it actually shows a major shift in the process of identity assertion. The range of their radical cultural perspective and politics can be seen in their inclusion of other socially marginalized groups, such as LGBTQ. And it is, in 2015 and 16, there were candidates from BAPSA, from the LGBT community, and that was kind of one of the initiatives which I think was interesting, that how different identities were coming together under this platform. So this is one of the many examples that how identity resistant politics are occurring across the country, and Dalit and OBC students are taking lead. Along with the assertion of Dalit OBC students taking center stage on university campuses in India, Dalit activism has identified imperatives of a global alliance with Black to expand the horizon to their democratic struggle. Although people talk about this alliance, but actually in reality, this alliance does not exist. People in my field work, I found that, if you talk to Black activists, they have no idea who Ambedkar was, and many of the Dalit activists had no idea what MLK or Malcolm has contributed. So it's kind of, but people, tend to use these terms, which actually does not exist in reality. But for the past decade, Dalit OBC students have challenged the roots of existing historical narratives, instead defining themselves based on their own histories and knowledge. They share a common ideology and common icon from Phule, Ambedkar, and Periyar, and many others. So they refer to Phule as, of course, it's a popular thing that how Savitri by Phule as Kranti Jyoti, or the flame of revolution, and they commemorate her birth anniversary on January 3rd as Women's Liberation Day, and also celebrate her birthday as National Teachers Day. Similarly, Dalit OBC students have challenged many cultural practices that were taken for granted. For instance, the majority of Dalit students at Osmania University have taken a lead in transforming ritual practices concerning marriage, foregoing Hindu rituals or priests. Even the design and content of their wedding cards, wedding invitations, with images of Ambedkar or Buddha in place of traditional Hindu gods and goddesses. It symbolizes resistance against the dominant culture. And this is kind of, again, with the spread of Rohit agitation, post-Rohit Vemula agitation, and Azadi campaign, the Popular Left Students Union also joined hands with Dalit OBC cultural politics and started celebrating their icons. So this is a recent phenomenon. Until 2005-6, this alliance was not possible, as I said. But also, left was not as interested in the Dalit icons. It is kind of, you can say, just a decade-old phenomena that has been changing. So now both these movements in 2016 also emerged as a prime examples of university society linkages. You would see that during that time, how many campaigns were launched to connect with society. I think I have documented many of those talks, that how outside campuses, students have organized almost in many bastis, many colonies, even in Delhi and other far other places, most of this kind of university society linkages was becoming strong, because and as an anti-national in the anti-national wave, how many other initiatives were taken. Another dividend of this movement was that a section among left parties realized further the intersectionality of caste and class categories. On the one hand, a segment of Dalits and OBC groups also came to understand caste, class, race, intersectionality, and to understand global forms of discrimination. Already, debates in this direction have opened up new scope for historically marginalized people to connect with other oppressed identities. This is a sort of, I would say, the universalization of a particular discrimination for highlighting it as a violation of human rights. The groundwork for this worldwide exchange derives its optimism partially from contemporary student politics. Emerging from the confluence of ideologies Jab Him Lal Salam, these contemporary movements are remaking hybrid ideological frames without sacrificing internal debates, dissension, and mutual grounds of consensus necessary for joint political actions. So to some extent, this togetherness resolves as well as complicates on issues on identity, and hence necessitates creative use of art form to develop these movements as melting pots of hitherto segregated ideologies, identities, and cultural practices. These new identities were constructed through their historic anti-caste resistance that occurred in various parts of the country in different time periods. The emergence of Dalit literature has gained prominence in this past decade, which is again a very, very recent phenomenon. Icons such as Ambedkar, Periyar, Phule, Birsa Munda, Shahuji Maharaj, Jhalkari Bai, B.P. Mandal, Ram Sarup Verma, Jagdev Prasad, and many others are the founding figures of their ideological orientation and dignified consciousness about identity. Young Dalit lead authors revere them as leaders of the majority, Bahujan Nayak. It is noteworthy that much popular Dalit literature emerged from the university campuses as a direct challenge to the complacent realism of Marxist or progressive writers and organizations. Since Dalits and OBC had no place in established canonical literature of India, Dalit writers in their writing challenged this cultural hegemony of Brahminical literature. Fully Ambedkarite activists have formed their own space over the decade. They have published a huge number of magazines, books, and booklets from their own publishing house and interacted with their own networks. And this is another interesting point, that how many publishing houses have been set up in last 10 years. That also shows a kind of assertion that a community is getting into. However, Fully Ambedkarite movement and its counterpublic is not a homogeneous field. On the contrary, it is highly diversified, like all other movements found around the globe. In fact, their activism has broadened the definition of Dalit literature. In 2016, we all have seen the power of a suicide note and how a suicide note becomes part of Dalit literature and can lead a global anti-caste movement. So the spirit of resistance from Dalit OBC student, and then eventually in past almost in a past decade, female students as founding members of BAPSA at JNU and CUG, contrary to the dominant notion that women are less political, the formation of BAPSA in JNU and CUG is axiomatic of the strength of female leadership in Dalit politics. Similarly, campuses like Punjab University, Allahabad University have female students contesting union elections and challenging the long existing caste and patriarchy in campus politics. And if you watch their interviews on YouTube, you will see a kind of understanding that that female activists are having, that is something kind of very, very unique compared to what has been going on in Dalit politics. An interesting fact that emerges from Dalit OBC coalition is the creation of a generic identity that ideologically helps the movement and its actors. Among Dalits, we see that there has been a shared history of caste discrimination and collective memories and common concerns. They created a common ideological identity in the forms of Dalit-Bahujan and Mool Nivasi to strengthen their cultural political discourse. Along with their fight for reservation, their collective action not only strengthened the social justice debate on university campuses, but also harbored an ideological balance among left and right wing student parties. Contemporary campus politics is the reflection of these ideological ambiguities and cultural contestation. I think I'll stop here and would love to hear what you say and would love to answer some of the questions. Thank you, Karthik.